Again, this is Tuesday, December 4th, 2018, and this is Nicole Morin-Scribner as the interviewer, and we are at the
Congregation Etzheim.
located on Bacon Street in Biddeford, and today I have the privilege of interviewing Cantor Beth Strassler and Dr. David Strassler. And we're going to be focusing on a couple of different things as part of this interview. One is you have both played a role in this community with your professional lives. And of course, Dr. Strassler is known as a family practitioner in our community for quite a while. And in addition to that, you have played a prominent role in the Jewish community in this area. So I'm looking forward to finding out a little bit more about that. So I'd like to start by getting a little bit of background information, kind of like where it all began, where you were born, something about your family life and where you grew up and when you went to school. And I'll have you go first, Beth, and then I'll have Dr. Strassler do the same thing.
Well, I grew up in Verona, New York, which is in the real upstate New York, between Utica and Syracuse. Some people will call Poughkeepsie upstate, but it's really not. So it's a small town. I lived on Bain Street and lived there my whole growing up life. I was born in 1954, and what else am I supposed to?
In terms of what your family life was like, a little bit about your family and what what it was like growing up, where you were, and then something about your education.
Yeah. I have a brother who's 4 years younger, and I would say we were a pretty close family when I was growing up. We were within walking distance of the elementary school, and religion was always an important part of our life together and celebrating holidays. And then when I was in high school, I also was very active with teaching in the Sunday school, as well as I had a choir of kids, and they'd walk down once a week from the elementary school, and we'd practice in my basement in my house. And so we sort of ditched the any robes or anything people might wear, and I used a guitar instead of anything else for the accompaniment. We'd come in from the back and, just do all sorts of different, lively things, just liven up the whole place, which was really fun. And I sang in the choir with my mom, and I delivered sermons here and there too, and I was pretty active all through.
Now, delivered sermons, tell me more about that.
Well, there was one time where it was like youth, the youth Sabbath, so I would be the one who would give the sermon that day or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, had your family been in the New York area for a long time?
My parents grew up in the upstate New York area, yep. And so we lived probably within 10 miles from where they were born and grew up.
And then after elementary and high school, you went on to college?
Yes, I went to the State University of New York at Buffalo. And I don't remember exactly which day, but during my very first week there, I met David, because he lived down the hall. It was a co-ed dorm with suites. And I just walked in and said, "Hi, my name's Beth, what's yours?" And he looked up, and that's how we met.
Oh.
Yeah, and we were very good friends for a long, long time. Well, we dated other people, and later on decided it could be something romantic. Yeah.
Well, great. Thank you for sharing that. Your turn.
So I'm from East Meadow, New York. That's where I grew up, although I was born in Brooklyn, and moved out to Long Island when I was 2 years old. The youngest of four boys, and was spaced out of every 2 years. My parents originally from Poland, but they met in the United States. And my dad came over in the mid to late 20s, my mother in the mid 30s. My mother came over on her sister's visa, and because her sister didn't want to leave her husband there. That sister who stayed, and her daughter and my mother's father, my grandfather, died in the Holocaust. They're the only ones who did not make it. That aunt's husband came over, who was my Uncle Morris, and Uncle Morris, known best as, I think he gave his license when he was 100. He died with about 102. And so I grew up in a suburb of New York City, and it was very easy for me to be Jewish where I lived because about a third of my class was Jewish. We had, school was closed for the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. There was never a test given on a Jewish holiday. There was never a major sporting event to it on a Jewish holiday. It was very easy to be Jewish. Grew up in a conservative synagogue that my parents were instrumental in help build in the community. I could say that I was not very active in terms of relative to Judaism. I would say that I would have been called a holiday Jew at that time. And I did Hebrew school, and then I did not do Hebrew high school. I was too interested in regular things in high school. And when I was 15, my father died, which was a major turning point in my life, like most teenagers. But in Judaism, one of the traditions is to so it's called Kaddish every day for about a year. And me and my brother used to go to services every morning before school. Either usually someone in the community would help drive us to school, and that was a major. You'd think, well, boy, then I became really religious because I went to service every day. But after the year was over, then I went back to just every now and then going to services. And as Beth said, when I finished high school, I decided to go as far away as I could afford to college, which was staying in New York State, going from East Meadow, Long Island to Buffalo. And that's, again, where I met Beth in our first week.
So was it a big transition to go from a very Jewish community to one that obviously wasn't?
Buffalo is very Jewish.
Okay.
At the college, it's still very Jewish.
Yeah.
And so that was not, no.
So it's not a transition.
You just may want to clarify that even though you don't consider yourself religious, you were bar mitzvahed when you were 13.
Yeah, I went through, that was standard. You get bar mitzvahed, and I still kept what you call kosher. I didn't eat pork, I didn't mix milk with meat. I was very aware of that. But religion was not a priority to me. It was more sports and education.
Now, you didn't grow up in the Jewish faith, is that
That's
correct?
Yep. I grew up in the Presbyterian Church. And for some reason, my parents named me Beth, which is really a Hebrew word. And I was baptized with water from the River Jordan. So you could say it was all predestined, I don't know. But yeah, I went to Buffalo and really hadn't had very much contact with the Jewish religion at all up to that point. And then actually during college, who did religion during college? Nobody I knew or hung out with. So it came later that I was just, sort of searching for what was right for me. And I don't know, I just didn't feel very fulfilled by the way I had grown up in the church because I had been very involved, but it still felt limiting in terms of what it was giving me. So it was later, when David and I, after college, we went all the way through college, and after that, another year, he came to visit, and all of a sudden it was like romantic, and violins and roses and all like that, you know. It was like, whoa. And then during the following year, it was like, well, how do we do this, you know? And we still disagree on who brought it up. I say he brought it up, but he says I brought it up, the idea of converting to Judaism. And so, and I always remember it was the time of the Oh God movies with George Burns. And we'd go to the Oh God movies and realize we had very similar ideas about God and how the world worked and people and everything like that. But when you talked about which structured religion, the walls went up, you know. So we spent some time exploring, really. And, you know, I said, you need to explore my background too and my religion and understand what that's about and what it means to me. And I studied Judaism and was actually a graduate student in a place where I found somebody who talked about interfaith marriage. At the time, the Jewish religion was not big on interfaith marriage at all. So I went to this guy who was also a marriage and family counselor and just talked about the whole thing and went to his Judaism 101 class. And David went with me to the class because he said, you know, I don't know everything about Judaism either. So we went to the class together, and then I just went to the sessions with the rabbi and tried to figure things out, and decided it was very, very rich religion, culture, history that I thought just would give me so much by being part of it. So I really felt like David introduced me to it, but that I did my own exploration of it and decided it would be really interesting for me. And I'm a Cantor, so there you go.
So it was near the end of your time in college that you kind of came to that realization? No, after.
After college, yeah.
So let me rewind the tape a little bit here.
Uh-huh.
Because it is, I think it's significant. So I went through growing up in East Meadow. It was not okay to date someone who's not Jewish. And when I went to college and I met Beth for the first time, and she was what I call a hick from upstate New York, and was not Jewish, I said to her early in our friendship that I just want to let you know that I cannot date you because you're not Jewish. And what'd you say?
I don't care, I don't want to date you anyway. He hadn't like filled out yet, he was still like really scrawny, you know. But I wasn't interested in him that way, you know, so it all worked out at that time.
And at that time I had a girlfriend, and she had a boyfriend from home, and actually who we met each other. But she was like my sister for years. We were very, very close.
Dating other people.
And so it was a real risk to our friendship to see if it would work. And it had a rocky beginning, and then we were already very close. And so a lot of those boundaries that people go through with games of trying to figure out who you are and what your interests, we already knew that stuff. I mean, we knew each other extremely well. We knew our families.
I was going to ask you that.
So there's a story about her parents lived on the New York, right off the New York Thruway, and I was hitchhiking home, and I asked if I get dropped off at the exit, and I walked over to where her parents lived, and no one was home, so I just went in. I just made myself at home. I got something to eat, And the parents came in, and there I was sitting there, and there's David. I mean, it's, so,
And on the other end, I went to visit, I think it was our first year of college in the spring. And Dave was like, well, you can't stay at my house. So his friend Mitchell, who was really like, you just had to know Mitchell, he was going to do his own thing no matter what, told his parents that David's friend Beth was going to be staying with them during the visit. And so I stayed at Mitchell's house. And we went over one day to David's house, and his mother came home. She had heard about me, you know, this non-Jewish woman and young woman. And when she came in to the house and I was there, I didn't think she was going to look at me. It was like she just acted as if I wasn't even there, which I had never experienced before, you know, that type of prejudice. So over the next couple of years, she came to realize we were dating other people and we were just friends, so she relaxed a little bit. And then we did the double whammy on her and started dating. And so I came to realize it was her job. It was her job as his mother to discourage him from marrying anyone who wasn't Jewish. And so every time we'd go to visit, she'd pull him aside and, you know, tell him about that again. And then one time I actually had a conversation with her about it too. And I said, I'm not going to marry him, I'm not going to become Jewish just so I can marry him. And we did talk a little bit, and then she says, I don't want to talk about this anymore. You know, so. And then once I converted, I was her best friend.
let me just fast forward, as they were very close.
Yeah. The greatest compliment was, she says, you remind myself of me when I was your age. That was her biggest compliment, so very sweet.
Now, what about your family? What was their reaction?
They knew what was going on before I did. They got it that David was just David. I mean, he was very, very special, even when we weren't dating yet. And so, you know, as we went through this whole thing, my parents just went, okay, yep.
So the, for lack of a better term, the prejudice or having any kind of concerns about going into, you know, different faith, or
They knew
a
him.
concern about you're losing your faith, that never,
No,
not a concern?
no, it wasn't. And they knew him already for 2 or 3 years and knew what a good person he was. And my parents were really amazing people, because they grew up in a small town in upstate New York on farms, and yet they had an amazing worldview for that. They really knew people. I remember when they met David's mother, and I'm like, oh boy, because David's mother was not the easiest person to converse with or be with. She was, you know, very in your face. And my parents knew exactly what to do. They knew exactly how to be with her and still enjoy her, and they were amazing. So where they got this worldview from, I don't know, but I definitely benefited from it.
What about friends or other family members?
What did my brother say?
The brother that David was closest to at the time is the one that he used to go to services with every day after their
Okay.
father died. So they got to know me, and they said, don't worry, if you break up, we'll keep you, and we won't talk to David anymore. That's what they said.
So I guess you were accepted
I was
there.
accepted, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, very much so.
So after undergrad, because we're going to cover your professional life as well, so you decided to pursue occupational therapy
Yes.
as a profession?
Yep.
So tell me about that.
My first job was in Ithaca, New York, in an adolescent psych unit. And that was the year that we talked on the phone all the time, trying to decide what to do and who said it first about converting.
Elmira, New York,
What'd I say?
Ithaca.
Oh, Elmira, sorry. Elmira Psychiatric Center is where I worked. And David, at the time, if you remember way back when, phone calls that were long distance were not free. But he worked at the VA for a while on his medical school rotation, so we would talk then when he could get the phone for free. So, and then that was the next summer that was violins and roses and all like that. So I guess she came in, yeah, so he came in the early summer, and I had been working there for a year, and I had been down to visit him the year before, and realized they had an excellent OT graduate program there, which I did want to do. So it's like June or something like this, and I decide, I'm going to graduate school in Florida. You know, something's got to work out, graduate school or David or both or one, you know. So I called them in July, I think, to try to find out about the program and vacancies and everything. And they said to me, we just had someone drop out of the graduate program for next year, and they left a full scholarship. Meant to be. So I quit my job before it was officially accepted, because they said it would happen, and drove down to Florida with my little dog and my U-Haul trailer, and yeah, it was a great program, really great program. Yeah.
Now, you were already in Florida, that's what she was saying at that point?
Yeah, I had just finished, I was in my second,
You finished your second year.
I finished my second year of medical school.
I was there for his third year.
Oh, I should have asked, so how did you decide to go to medical school? How did you choose that profession?
Wait, where is it?
So the story goes,
Right there.
I have a scar under my chin, Beth's pointed to. When I was either 5 or 6, I was battling a little girl for a water fountain, and she won, and I fell on the floor and split out my chin. And I went to, I wound up going to the emergency room, and this magical person stitched it up, and I didn't feel a thing. He actually, I think he did visualization to take care of it. In any event, I said, I want to be like that person. Now understand, that was like music to my mother's ears. A Jewish doctor, so it was reinforced throughout school. I was fortunate enough to be able to do well in school and get good grades. And so when I went to, there are so many stories. I'll just tell you a couple of them. One of them was I almost decided not to become a doctor when I was about, I'm going to say 16, and my brother gave blood at the hospital, and he asked me if I wanted to go along. I said, sure, I want to be a doctor. Let me see what goes on with this stuff. And so I went, and I was sitting in a chair, and he was across me. He couldn't have been more than 15 feet away, and they were drawing blood, and all of a sudden, next thing I heard was just to take some deep breaths, just keep your head down, and I passed out. And I just remember going, how could someone be a doctor if they can't watch blood being drawn? And I said, this is not going to be, this is like all of a sudden my whole world was turned around. So I said, no, I think I'll be able to do it. So then I went to, I wound up going to Buffalo, and I was chemistry major, and I remember working at the VA hospital there, and I worked at the nuclear medicine department with one of the nuns over there, and I said, okay, what could I do that would be that would prove to me that I could do this? I had to have proof. And so I asked her if she could help me watch an autopsy. So she went ahead and talked to one of the pathologists there, and they allowed me to sit in on an autopsy. I said, if I could watch an autopsy, I could do anything in medicine. And so I went to an autopsy, and the saws, the drills, whatever you want to call it, but any event, scalpels. So I watched the autopsy, and the whole time going, you could do it, you could do it, you could do it. And I was fine. And so then what happened is many people were pre-med. And now you're in a whole group of people who are all bright, and you knew not everyone was going to be able to do it. And I was just very fortunate. I became a chemistry major, and it became very easy to me. and I was able to get good grades. I was, I still am very focused with my studies. I was very clear what I wanted to get and what I wanted to do, and my time was pretty much mapped out every day. So I would say, okay, I want to go to this concert. That's going to be from 9 to 11. So I'm going to study from 5 to 8:30, go to the concert, and then at 11:30 I'll finish my studying. And I would just, that's just what it was. I'd go into what's called the stacks in the library, and I used to sit down in this booth and just study and what I need to do. So in my second year,
Can I just say something?
sure.
Dave was always very proud of the fact too of I'm living my life. I'm pre-med, or then he was in medical school, but I'm also living my life. You know, I can compartmentalize and do that. So he was very proud of that.
So
It was important to him.
I did sports. I went around hitchhiking around the New England Northeast on weekends, and so in any event, after my second year of college, I realized I'm doing pretty good. And it turned out that we had an RA on our floor, Hank, who decided to go to medical school, go to medical school after his third year of college. And so I talked to him a little bit, and I said, how'd you do? He said, I just applied. I did well. So I went ahead and applied after my third year, because that was my goal, was to get to medical school, not to do undergraduate. I didn't really want to be a chemist. So I applied, and I got into University of Florida. And so after 3 years, I left and went there. Coincidentally, Beth left Buffalo the same year to do her OT externships.
Mm-hmm.
So she wouldn't have been there anyway. But I can't say that, I could say that we were very close the first year. The second year, she moved off campus. I still lived on campus. We still did stuff together. We still saw each other. By the third year, we really started to have a whole different set of friends. And although we saw each other, we were involved in other stuff. So we kept in touch, but
Well, I was dating somebody my whole third year who was extremely possessive and jealous of any other male friend that I would have, which was not a good thing, but I didn't know it at the time.
so then I went to University of Florida Medical School. Now, again, you're now with 100 students who are all bright, and you're sort of looking around saying, you might be able to do this. And it's extremely intense, medical school is. You start off with anatomy, where you're dissecting a body. You really don't know these people very well. And then after the first year, I realized that, hey, I could do this, but it was very, very intense. When I went to medical school, I thought that I wanted to be a family doctor from the beginning, and it was something that was not looked upon very highly at the time. Primary care, they didn't use the word primary care. General practice was the word, but now you had a family practice. And when I decided I wanted to continue in that direction, the assistant dean who was in charge of writing your letter and helping you get your residencies and stuff, I remember sitting down with him for our talk, and he asked me, so what was I interested in? And I said, family practice. And he said, why would someone so smart want to go to that type of field? And I already had a few run-ins with him, because I was the president of my class, and we didn't always agree on how things should be done. And I just took it for that I didn't expect him to agree with me. I didn't look at it as I'm letting anyone down. I would say in a class of a little over 100, maybe about 8 of us went to family practice. So I'm gonna describe for you another major experience in our life together. So when you go to family practice,
It sounds like there's somebody downstairs.
so once you're done with your third year of medical school, then you're going on to figure out your residency, so you have to go through what's called the match. And
Ridiculous.
so so we went to different places in the country to look at family practice residencies that I'd go to. And around that time, Beth was working in New Jersey with a very well-known occupational therapist. And I had done a externship rotation in family practice in the community. And so for the and it was a very good program. So when you match, you list your top programs in priority, and then they list you, and whoever likes each other best, that's where you go. So in March, match day, I put down as my number one was New Jersey, where Beth really had a job waiting for her with someone who was very good for a good residency. And we're sitting there with all the other students and their spouses, significant others, whoever, and they hand you an envelope. And you're sitting there, and then on the count of three, whatever, everyone opens their envelope. And so, so I open the envelope, and I look at it, and I look at Beth, and I show it to her.
And he didn't get New Jersey.
No.
Got his number 2 choice.
Which was York, Pennsylvania, which was a good residency. But it was one of those moments where, okay, now what? You know, my first thing was, is she gonna come with me to my residency?
I couldn't talk for 2 hours. I couldn't speak. I was just such a huge shock. I guess we were used to working really hard for things and then getting them. And it didn't happen this time. So that was big.
So the message she gave to me was, of course I'm going to Pennsylvania. Wasn't a question. But I said to her, when I'm done with the residency, you choose where we go.
And we ended up in New England.
So,
Yep.
And of course, that was going to be one of the segues I was looking for is, how did you end up here in Biddeford?
We were in York, Pennsylvania for his residency. And the last year, I started teaching at Towson State University, which is north of Baltimore, so it was maybe a 45-minute commute down, and discovered how much I really love teaching, a lot. So I decided that that's what I wanted my next step to be. So there's a program at UNE that was just starting up, and then there's a really good program at UNH. So I interviewed at both of them. And UNE was just too new, and I was going to be the second faculty, and I didn't have that much experience. And the woman who was heading the program at the time, and I just didn't seem to click really well. But UNH was an amazing place. I had great faculty, and it would be a good place for me to learn. And so, unfortunately, New Hampshire didn't turn out to be a good place for family practice. It was very specialty oriented. And Maine was better for family practice. And in the process of looking at where there were openings, the group here in Biddeford at the time, it's really changed now, although they all had their own practices, they really worked together well on a call schedule and as a call group. So it was really appealing, you know, in that way. And I ended up commuting for those years at UNH. So, I mean, they hired me to set up a program. That's why they hired me. And I did. And I love teaching. And I love being part of the faculty. I don't like going in and just teaching a course and leaving. I do enjoy that hour with the students, but it's just so out of context of everything else. So very reluctantly, I ended up giving up my position. And that was very difficult because I knew it was my last chance to get tenure as a professor with a master's. I knew the tide was turning. It was later in our profession than in others. But I knew the tide was turning and I would never be able to do it later with a master's. I would have to pursue a doctorate. So I really didn't want to leave, but I did. And I was mad for a long time. I was just mad. It was like, well, why can't I make as much money as David makes? Well, why can't he go part-time, you know? So anyway, but we had a lovely baby boy, and it turns out he really needed quite a bit of attention too, so that worked out well. And so when we brought our lovely baby boy here for the high holidays, he was about 10 months old, and it hit us between the eyes, there's no children here. These are all older people, they only get together for the high holidays. What are we gonna do? We don't want to take him all the way to Portland to see other Jewish kids. So that was interesting to experience too. And that led to our motivation to try to get something going here.
So I gotta go backwards a little bit.
Okay.
Because I think you skipped some
I did, but
important parts to me, but that's fine.
okay.
So, when Beth was decide where she's going to be here, and I decided that Biddeford was a good area, and there were 3 family doctors who were in individual practices who were glad to have a 4th person, who also did obstetrics and did everything they did. So after I talked to them, I was counseled, well, you should always talk to the hospital administrator to make sure to see what it's like. And I sat down with the hospital administrator at the time, and I said to him that I'm interested in moving to Biddeford to be a family doctor here. And this is now about 4 years after the old Weber turned into the new Weber. It was before Southern Maine Healthcare. And they had done some recruiting of doctors at the time, mostly specialists in internal medicine. And so I told him I was interested. He said, I don't think you'll be able to make it here. We wouldn't need you. We have enough doctors here. Okay? So I said, okay. So I went back to the 3 doctors, and they were livid. They couldn't believe he would say that. And they said, don't worry, you'll be fine. And so I sort of said, well, I said, I've never been someone to always go with the flow, especially administration. And so I decided to hang up my shingle on Franklin Street, next to Doc's Tavern here in Biddeford. We moved here in July, but I didn't start practicing until October. That gave me a chance to spend some time vacationing here, learn systems, get to meet people, start to get the practice together. 2 things happened, two major people or things that happened during that time. One was we met Dr. Carl Haas, and we became very good friends. Me and him, his wife and Beth, of the 4 of us, and he had just sold his practice, and he kicked himself because he said, you would be perfect for my practice, because our personalities were very similar. And but he helped me feel comfortable here. He was also Jewish. He had his education in Germany, and he said to me that you do not have to worry in Biddeford. There's no anti-Semitism here. He says, I've been very well accepted by the community. Not that I thought too much about that. Before we moved here, though, I need to say that when we looked around at places and we moved to Biddeford, we felt comfortable living in Arundel because there was a synagogue in Biddeford.
Oh, that part.
So we said, okay, there is some Jewish community, and so people said we were crazy, including my mother, who said, are there Jews in Maine? We said, if there's synagogue, then it's probably okay. But we didn't investigate the synagogue itself too well.
We only did our homework halfway.
So But I could say that we were very confident that if we had each other, we would make it work. And I think that happened with Judaism, with our kids' education, with our jobs. So that was one piece. I'll go back to again. The other piece, when I was setting up my office, and I had all my plans set up of what I felt I needed to practice, and I was recommended to go to a Maine National Bank to meet Archie, I'm blocking his last name. Any event, and I sat down with Archie, and he said to me, how can I help you? He had been the president of the bank, but they just went through a transition. And he said, these are things I need, I want us to practice. He said, I've never had a doctor in this community default on a loan. He says, you just tell me what you need and you'll be fine. And so I put everything together, and then I went back to him, and at that meeting was someone from Portland, from the place that had brought out Maine National, and Archie at the time was probably in his early 60s, and this guy was probably in his early 30s with an MBA, and we sat down, and I went through what I wanted, and the guy from Portland looked at the plans. He said, I think you're asking for way too much here. You're just starting out, you don't need all this. And I looked at Archie, and Archie looked at me, and he didn't say a word. He did not say a word. I walked out like going, I didn't even go to another bank. I mean, they told me you should go to 3 banks and see who gives you the best deal, but I felt like he was recommended, it felt really good. I walked out of there like going, I guess I have to go somewhere else to ask them, because I felt this is what I needed, because I was going to be busy right away. And this guy said, it's going to take you a while to build your practice. Why do you need all this stuff? So I left. I was walking out of the room, and Archie caught me. He said, I'll talk to you later. I'm really sorry, I'll talk to you later. He said, come back tomorrow. I came back the next day. He said, you're all set. He was livid. Now, this is the first experience he had where someone was telling him what he could and could not do. And, but he followed through and set up my practice. And within 2 years, I had to stop accepting new patients.
If I'm understanding this correctly, unless I missed a point, this is
1982.
and it's your first time that you're setting out, and usually you hear, oh my God, I've got all these bills, from your education, and you're starting out your practice for the first time in a brand new community, and then there's even the question mark to some extent of how accepted will you be, both for family practice and is there a need, and then there's your faith as well, and you just dove right in.
We bought a house. We had a house payment for the first time. Yep.
No, when we moved here, we said this is where we're going to spend the rest of our life. There was no reason not to.
Was it unusual at that time that the very first job that you would take once you are capable of practicing, that you don't start by being part of another group versus?
It wasn't a job at the time. At the time, people set up their own practices.
Okay.
They were independent.
So
They were part of another bigger group at the time. And it was sort of like dwindling down, but still, that's the way it was.
well, here in Biddeford, there's a lot of solo practitioners.
Yeah.
There were people who join another person or 2 people. You're right, that would happen, but you also have solo practitioners. So I had a debt, but I didn't have a big debt. Part of it was because I didn't have much money when I went to medical school, so I got a lot of money just because I didn't have money. So a lot of it was paid for, so I did have a loan, but not like you're hearing about now.
And also
loans that
Social
people have.
Security from your father's death.
Some of that.
Yeah.
So-
And to go to in-state in New York at that time,
I didn't have a debt from.
it was like hundreds of dollars a semester, like maybe 200 or 400, something like that. It was just unbelievable.
So then,
And then when you went to Florida, his mom had bought a place in Florida, so he was able to get in-state tuition. But at the University of Florida, that's a big deal, because there's a big difference between in and out. And so that helped.
so then the other piece around that time when we started practice was, so here we come to a synagogue, which we really still didn't know. We walked in on the first night of Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, and the service, we basically came into the service maybe about 15, 20 minutes after it started. Not really realizing that it's actually a very short service. Evening service,
yeah.
very short. And we walked in and the service was in some of the concluding prayers. When we walked in, the service stopped. There may be 25 people there with an old rabbi who was leading the service. It stopped and people came over to us to welcome us. You know, we heard something about you, or who are you? It's glad to have you, and we hope to see you again. And we came the next day, and we came for services for
Who led that year? Who led services that year?
the old rabbi. I think,
Matt Weinstein?
no.
There was an older rabbi.
Older
Did he
rabbi.
come from somewhere?
Yeah, they hired him.
I
He
see.
was a hired rabbi.
Yep,
He was the person before Scott.
yep.
In any event, so
At the time, just to be clear too, there were high holiday services every year for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That was it. When there would be a yard site, which is the anniversary of a death of a close family member, you'd want to get together and say prayers. They would call everybody else to get the 10 people required, the minyan, and they'd say the prayers for the yard site. But otherwise, there was nothing going on here. So, yeah. And just before we came, I think the board had had a big meeting.
1980.
In 1980, just before we came. And half the board wanted to close the synagogue and half the board wanted to keep it open. So the half that wanted to close it left, the board and the community for much, and the other half stayed
And they went to,
kept
and
this.
they went to Portland to practice there.
Yeah. And then other people stayed here and tried to, limp along here for a while, basically.
Yeah. So
Because the last rabbi was in 63. So there was an older group here at the time who saw to the needs of whatever the building needed or whatever. And, kept the lights on, kept the services going in the way I mentioned. And then there started to be a few more younger families.
let's go backwards just a little bit about the history. So some of those people who were here who kept the lights on. So at the time it was Arnold Shapiro was the president.
Mm-mm. He became president after.
No, when we came here, when we got here.
Go back to.
I'm going to go backwards, but when we got here was Arnold Shapiro. And Arnold basically said, I never wanted to be the president, but Edie Carlin talked me into being on the board. Because on high holidays, may Arnold rest in peace.
No, she talked him into being president, and she would be vice president.
Okay, that's
Yes.
fine. And unfortunately, shortly after they made that commitment, she died. She was going to do all the work, and he was just going to be the sort of
The figurehead.
figurehead, and now she passed away. So he basically was fortunate because he had also a group on the board who were very supportive for him. That was Sam Cohn, that was Toby and John Nathanson, that was Edie's wife, husband Sam Carlin. And so they sort of kept the place going.
They did keep the place going.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
And Arnold was the head of Union Oil here in Biddeford, so he had a lot of people at his fingertips that he would pull in to do this little repair at the synagogue or that little repair at the synagogue or whatever. He had his little group of carpenters or electricians or whatever that he would call on, because he also grew up in Biddeford and knew the electricians, the police, you know, everything like that. So,
which is very important,
very important.
because we'll get to that. I just want, Beth, why don't you tell what happened when we had Joseph and our relationship to the synagogue?
I said already when we came in there were no other children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when we had our children, we realized, like, do we really still want to go here if there's no children? So we went to Portland and we went to the synagogues there just to see what they were like. And we did that for a little bit.
I remember that.
We went to Beth
I
Ham,
remember.
went to Bethel,
Yeah. Which were
Yeah.
very different than they are now.
Yeah.
Very different.
and so, and then at some point, I'm gonna say Beth probably said it, saying, why are we schlepping to Portland when we have a synagogue here? We have met some Jews who have some kids also. Maybe we should do it here. And so one of the things that Beth and I started here was a Sunday school.
Mm-mm. The Hanukkah party came first.
Okay.
David had met a lot of the Jewish community through his practice. And I was commuting to UNH still. But we knew there were people around, they just weren't all connected, really. So we decided to have a Hanukkah party at our house. And it was like all these people that lived in Biddeford, who were used to not many Jews being around, came to our house in Arundel. And all these other people from Kennebunk who were moving into the area and were Jewish came to our house, and they met each other. And they were like, oh my gosh, look at this, you know. But, you know, Biddeford was dwindling. Kennebunk and Kennebunkport were growing with Jewish families. And they met each other at that first Hanukkah party, which was really wild. It was just great. So the second year we had the Hanukkah party at Toby's restaurant, which is now Amato's out there. And John had some great potato peelers, so that everybody was using this potato peeling machine and making the latkes. And so the Hanukkah party was really the first thing we did as a community event, because it's a time when people want to be with Jewish people if they're Jewish, you know, and where can you find them, right? So that's that part.
So then we set up the Sunday school,
Mm-hmm.
and we did that together.
Actually, no, you're skipping something else.
Okay, go ahead.
After a few years, a group of us got together and decided to put together a survey to try to find who was here and what they wanted. And it was amazing. It was like people were coming out of the woodwork. And I remember there was a family in Kennebunkport, the Shulkins, and they had started some of the education here. But what really happened again at Hanukkah was the Biddeford paper ran this big article about Hanukkah, and this like half-page photo of the Shulkin family lighting the Hanukkah candles, and it was like coming out of the closet. It was like people had never talked to their neighbors about being Jewish. And so here was this big picture of this family lighting Hanukkah candles in this area, and it was really a big deal that happened. So we decided to put together a survey, because we also found that the Jewish Community Alliance, which used to be the Federation in Portland, really didn't know our community very well at all. And we were finding people that were not on their mailing list at all because they hadn't identified themselves to that organization as a Jewish family. So we found we knew more Jewish families here by living here and connecting that way than through the organization. So the survey showed that what people wanted the most was a Jewish education for their children. That's what we heard the most. And that's why we went that way first. And we've ended up with many families where one parent is Jewish and one parent is not, but they want their kids to have a Jewish education, and both parents support it and bring them here, and most of them go on to have bar and bat mitzvahs, and it's something where they've made the commitment to it before they come in the door. So once they're here, you know, which is really, and many people of our generation especially didn't have a really wonderful experience in their Hebrew school growing up. It was taught by old guys from Europe who were given jobs and didn't really necessarily like children, you know. So it wasn't always a great experience for them. And so many times it's ironic, the non-Jewish spouse realizes how important it is to the Jewish spouse and brings the family in. And it involves some healing on the part of the Jewish parent, you know. But we have all sorts of Jewish parents involved here now who never, ever thought they'd be involved with the synagogue in their life. So that to me is the real success, because people who are alienated from Judaism feel comfortable here. People who are not Jewish feel comfortable here. Comfortable enough they want to bring their kids here and have their kids be part of it. And that to me is the measure of success right there.
So going back to historical perspective, so here when growing up in Long Island, it's very easy to be Jewish. Here in Biddeford, it's not so easy to be Jewish or raise a family being Jewish. And so setting up a Sunday school, I never thought I would be teaching Sunday school with Beth. I thought that someone else would be teaching my kids, but who else? So we did a lot of research. We got a lot of materials from my family down in the Baltimore, D.C. area. Head Start.
They sent stuff.
Okay,
Oh yeah, Head Start, sorry.
Right.
Home Start.
Home Start.
Home Start.
So we got all these materials. Beth is very, very talented in music, storytelling. I had some knowledge in Judaism of growing up, and we set up a format to do stuff for kids.
This was younger kids.
These are Sunday school younger kids.
And they would bring their parents. So we ended up actually really doing family education,
Yeah.
because the
And we-
parents were there too. And both, sometimes the Jewish parent would bring them, sometimes the non-Jewish parent would bring them.
And it just shows the synagogue was really not being used at all, except for what we mentioned. And now we asked, like, we use the synagogue to have Sunday school, and the Shulkin family at the time organized Hebrew school.
Yeah, the
They're
older
very
kids.
small, the older kids. And they were thrilled. The community says, whatever you want, just let us know. So now it's winter time, and I would come in on Saturday night, and I would turn the heat up for Sunday morning, for Sunday school. And probably once a month when we come in, we'd have to mop the floors up because the pipes burst, because they hadn't been used. And so we get on the phone and call Arnold, and Arnold would cause one of his men to come down. They'd come right down and they'd fix the pipes. Well, I think within 3 or 4 years, all the pipes were taken care of, and we didn't have to worry about it anymore. But the place hadn't been used.
Yeah.
And so
In fact, after that, we started to have a speaker series too, like maybe 4 times in the school year. And it was more for adults. And I remember having one of the rabbis from Portland come down, and he was talking about medical ethics and Judaism, I think. And there's a pipe bursting in the ladies' bathroom, and Arnold's in there mopping up the water in the bathroom. Yep.
So, fast forward a little bit more. Now Joseph is
Our oldest.
our oldest, and he's now 7. The year before he was 6, and he started Hebrew school here. And so the Hebrew school was on a Thursday afternoon, and
Because?
because I had Thursday afternoon.
No, it
Why-
didn't start with
why-
you, it started with Shulkins.
Why did it happen?
Because Shulkins were a skiing family.
Oh, they're
They
skiing.
went
So
skiing every weekend, so they started it on a weeknight.
that's right.
And they
Okay.
stayed on a weeknight.
So in any event, so his second year of Hebrew school, I had Thursday afternoons off, and I said, you know what, I'll volunteer. And so there were 2 classes, younger and older, and Joseph was in the younger one, and I remember sitting at the table downstairs, and with about 4 little kids, and it's about 3:45, and
Hebrew school started at?
3:45, and we're just talking, and there's the first day of Hebrew school, and I knew the kids, and 4 o'clock rolls around, and the teacher comes in, and her hair is like every which way. She worked in Portsmouth. She was their teacher last year, and she comes in, and she says, "I cannot do this again."
Well, and the other teacher wasn't coming either. Mitch,
Consistently.
you've got it about. He was the hired teacher, I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
and he wasn't showing up. And they wouldn't call, they would just not show up.
So Annette goes, "I just can't do it this year." And I'm sitting there going, okay. So I said, "Well, I guess I'll give it a try." Now understand that my breadth of knowledge for Hebrew was now at Sunday school level.
Little kids.
And I knew how to do services very well because when my father died, I did that every single day when I was 15. I could read Hebrew, which in Judaism means you could decode it, you could read it, but you have no idea what you're reading
From the prayer book.
from the prayer books.
Only, yeah.
I knew the Hebrew letters, and I knew the holidays. I knew very little history. I knew very little Bible study. In any event, so I said, okay. And I said, I will have to teach them where I'm at, what I know. And that's what I did that year as I went along, just muddled along. I probably did that for a couple of years. And then around that time, and we tried to figure out also the other teaching position where we had another person who was sort of came and went. And anyway, some of it gets muddled about exactly what happened when, but we found out about that there was this conference in northern Vermont for rural Judaism. And basically you had all these little communities all over New England that was trying to do exactly what we were doing. You had people who sort of fled from the Jewish cities and suburbs to live a New England life with very few resources and Jews there, and they all got together and spent a weekend sharing with each other and teaching each other about what they did and sort of
Having services together.
having service together.
Yeah.
And it became our main resource for developing our Hebrew school. There was some wonderful teachers there, there's some wonderful resources, and it helped empower us to be able to do this because other people were also having trouble. I thought everyone was having this certain type of education.
And what was also surprising was, not surprising now, but it was at the time, is the communities in Portland, the Jewish synagogues weren't really helpful to us. They were only helpful if we wanted to become part of them, like a satellite or something like that. And we're like, no, we want to be independent. Well, they didn't understand that. Just come to Portland. It's so much better. And we're like, we don't want to, like, we live south of here. We don't want to drive 40 minutes for our kids to see another Jewish kid. No, we want to do something here. And they didn't get it. But the people at this conference got it. They understood where we were coming from and how to support us in doing it.
So it was one of the major family events for us for about 15 years. We knew that weekend we would go all as a family going to Vermont. And we had a great time. We got to meet a lot of people, got to know a lot of people, networking. It helped us develop a curriculum. It was sort of haphazard. We developed a curriculum, we developed some confidence.
It wasn't haphazard. We did
And
it step by step.
And Beth had a teaching degree. And so she really was helpful in organizing how we did our curriculum.
The ironic thing was one of the women who helped us the most was a Jewish educator from, where was she? Auburn. So we go to Vermont to meet the Jewish educator in Auburn, and she actually had come down and done a couple consultations with us, which were really helpful.
So one of the things that I remember is that who are we to do this? And feeling like we're doing the best we can, but what validates what we do? And then we got really fortunate because we got to know Eber Weinstein. And Eber Weinstein is from Old Orchard Beach. And he was another person who sort of was an adult learner. When he was growing up, he wasn't really Jewish, but then when he was in his early 20s, he went to Israel and just loved it and he became a Jewish scholar. And he was involved with the Orthodox Synagogue in Old Orchard Beach. And so we asked Eber, Eber, would you mind, how would you like to teach at our Hebrew school? Because we didn't have an older teacher. He was like thrilled. He said, sure. And so now we had someone who's probably one of the most learned people in all of Maine at our Hebrew school teaching. And it sort of made us feel better that our kids were getting an education from someone who really knew what they were doing, as some of us were learning as we went along. And so he would help us teach some things.
And you have to understand how unique this is, because a lot of people who are such scholars or orthodox in their Judaism, they don't want to be associated with a synagogue like ours that's not orthodox. It's not following different different ways of life that he would follow. That he was open to coming into this community the way it was and not trying to change it. You know, that was also the part about his personality that was amazing. And he loved teaching because he wanted to share his knowledge, and he accepted us the way we were.
And he just loved to have people who were Jewish learn more about Judaism. That's all he cared about.
Yeah.
He wasn't asked to be like him. It was a great experience. And then what happened over years as we started to learn more and more, feel more comfortable, whenever we were able to move on, we would feel comfortable that we were able to now teach. There is so I always had to go, in my learnings, I came across the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov was the originator of the Hasidic movement in the 1800s, I think. And for him, Judaism came from the heart. It wasn't the knowledge, it was the heart. And so when I read about this guy who led the Hasidic movement, that was the most important thing. It gave me courage to continue and to do this, to saying, who's to say that I can't be a teacher if what I'm trying to do is impart Judaism to our community? No, not that anyone ever would, it was my own more than anyone else.
Well, but it was a time when Temple Bethel in Portland, for example, which is the conservative, which is probably what we're the closest to in the prayer service that we do. I mean, their kids met 3 times a week. We met once a week for 2 hours, 2.5 maybe. That's it. So to me, the other thing was also to find the methods that would work when you're only seeing the kids that long. So we really scored at the Vermont conference by meeting Rick Schwag, and he taught a pictorial version of Hebrew. So instead of learning the names of all the letters and everything, you looked at the letter and you thought about, well, what does it look like? And then you used that to help you know the sound. Like there's a letter that it sort of looks like this. And it's like your three middle fingers. And so you can call it a shin, but that doesn't help all the time. So we would just tell the kids it's a 3-masted ship. And then they would remember the sound with the picture, and that's what they needed to read. And we just felt like that was a much better method for limited time with them. And then in Judaism, there's also all the vowels, which are basically dots or dashes. So for example, one of them looks it goes under the letter, and it sort of looks like a T, and the sound is ah. So I would teach them, it's like you're putting your tongue out, and do something like that. Instead of learning that I can't even think of the name of it at the moment. No. Come on. But anyway, it was irrelevant to know the names for what we were trying to teach them. And our final score was, what's his name? He studied the Jewish language, the Hebrew language a lot and wrote a lot of books about it. His name will come to me. He's a linguist. Hoffman, yep. And his father had been a scholar. He was a scholar, but he was I would say, down-to-earth scholar. So he would say, first of all, understand you're not teaching these kids to read Hebrew. You're teaching them to decode it. Because when you read something, you understand what it means. And these kids don't understand what it means. You're just trying to help them to be able to go along with prayer, in a service. So it's decoding what's in front of them, not really reading. And there's nothing wrong with that, but let's just call it what it is. The other part of his philosophy was, in Hebrew school with these kids, do no harm. And we felt like, oh, that's exactly what we're doing. We're giving them a positive experience because we said if the kids don't like being here, we don't want to do it. And the parents had such a history of hating Hebrew school, and it was just horrible. And I remember specifically 2 Jewish mothers who said, well, okay, we'll send our kids to Hebrew school, but they'll probably hate it. But then they didn't hate it when they came here. They loved it. And so these mothers were trapped because it was joyful in learning, joyful in connecting. We had people coming from different communities, not just Biddeford or Saco. It's more outliers, now. People don't live right in the city. And all these kids are so bright, and they're just so happy to find each other, I guess, that it's been a really good experience for them to be here.
So that's one of the questions I was going to ask you, is as a result of all of your efforts, did you see a growth in the number of people who started coming and attending and engaging?
So at its peak, we had 32 kids in our Hebrew school, which is a lot.
A lot.
So yes,
Everything goes in cycles, though. So we're 32, but now we're down to a lower number. And if you talk to anyone who's teaching a religious school right now, that's what they'll say. The numbers are down across the board. So we're actually wondering if we need to retool and maybe do more adult education, because there seem to be a lot of adults around that want to do this or want to do that. We're not quite sure yet what they want as far as classes would go. We do a once a month adult education, which has been really extremely popular, and it's more of a I don't know what you call it, Jewish cultural event.
So going back just a little bit more, so what happened is we were doing the Hebrew school and Sunday school. There came a critical time where the elders of the synagogue were trying to figure out how do we transition between generations. And as I recall, we had a meeting downstairs, and we had probably at least 30 people. And the conversation was like, who are we, where we go from here? And it turned out there were a couple of people there who were very vocal from our generation.
But that was way before.
Okay.
That was before we did the survey and everything.
But
That was way back.
okay, but it was
That was
critical.
before we started anything.
I'm not sure of the timing, I agree, but in any event,
That was before we had started anything, excuse me.
what happened was the elders sort of saw, like, are these people representative of the community who wants to come in? Like, one of the questions is, how can we do anything in the synagogue if you don't let us bring in non-kosher food? That makes no sense at all. That's
And one other
example.
person said, well, I'm an educator. I don't know Hebrew, but I'm an educator. I can learn how to teach it. These are just things that are not going to go over big with the older generation at all. And so it was sort of thrown in their face about they wanted to be supportive and they wanted to be flexible, but these are not things you say, you know. But this was way back before we did the survey, before we started any of the programs or anything like that. And we actually laid low for another year or two after that because it had not been a very positive experience. And I'm glad you brought it up because it shows it wasn't always like a smooth road.
No. So what happened was, we kept coming to services here, we got to know the community, we became sort of a liaison, and we felt like we were very much accepted when they approached us and they said, would you like to be on the board? I said, sure, whatever that means. What that meant was, once a year we meet before the holidays at Arnold and Barbara's house, and we talk about what to do, what we should do, get ready for the high holidays, and that was the board meeting.
Because that's all that was going on, you know, in the synagogue.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then we used the facility. We paid a rental fee to use it because it charged a small amount of tuition.
Wait, later. That was much later.
Yeah. So in any event, fast forward.
Wait. Okay, if you're going to go that far, then we were very fortunate that our older generation was so supportive, and they weren't saying, like, an Orthodox tradition has to be followed here. You must continue to do this and do that and do something else. They didn't do that. One of them was that way, but didn't impose it on the community. And the other people really weren't that Orthodox anyway, so it didn't matter to them, fortunately for us. So they were like, whatever you can do to bring people in, great. And Sam Cohen was a blessing because he said, whoever walks through the front door and wants to be here is a Jew. Because remember, I remember there was a whole controversy about who is a Jew. You know, is it this person or that person? Does your mother have to be Jewish and all like that? He says, who else would want to be here? You know, who else is going to come here other than someone who wants to be Jewish, you know? So it eliminated that controversy. It eliminated the Orthodox, you have to do it this way controversy. And they were the generation with the money at the time. And the younger generation was the one with the kids. So it was this wonderful working together for many years of that cooperation between them. And I think that actually some of the younger generation were more rigid because they didn't really have a background in Judaism, or they had a limited background. So the way that they had done it was the only way to do it. You know, so sometimes they were more rigid than the older people were. So it was interesting to put that together.
So after we were here for several years, how are we doing? After we were here for several years, what I remember is the old rabbi who was doing the high holiday services, for whatever reason, they decided to hire someone else. And they brought in Scott Rappaport. Now, Scott Rappaport's from Bangor, and beautiful voice. He had cantorial background, and he came in and led our high holiday services. And it was like a breath of fresh air for this place.
He had an Orthodox background,
Yeah.
but again, he didn't impose it on everyone.
But so the high holiday services were wonderful. He did the whole thing. Everything. He did. And so I bring that up because over time, and so.
And the president was in the back going, you got to be done by a certain time. So he would go, blah, 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 to go through the service.
So, in looking at the history of the synagogue of what happened with high holiday services is phenomenal. So Scott used to do everything. So we finally, I believe, got up the nerve to talk to Scott and saying, and now we were more on the board now, so we sort of knew more of what was going on. We said, Scott, how would you like to have someone help you out by reading some of the English?
The first thing we did was we talked to the board about changing the prayer book.
Oh, yes.
Because the prayer book was like ancient. There was absolutely no English in it at all. or transliteration. You know, transliteration is when, do you know what that is? Where you take the Hebrew characters and you sound it out and you write it in the English characters. So Adonai, you figure out how to spell it in English and you put that in. There was none of that either. So the first thing we did with the board and with Scott was to pick the new prayer book.
That we felt would be more amenable to people who were younger, come to services
Yeah.
that they could at least relate to.
Yep.
And so we got 5 books, and we went through it with the people on the board. And I remember that Sam Cohn, who's probably the most knowledgeable of the board, went through the book, and he basically said it's between these 2.
And everyone else deferred to him.
Because the other 3 didn't include certain things that would have made it too liberal, I'm going to say. And he wanted to at least keep some of the conservative orthodox flavor to it. And so he chose one of them, and we got about 100 books, and we started using those.
Then I think you talked to Scott
And then-
about.
And then we asked Scott, how would you like to have someone on the Bima, on the platform, to do some English? And he said, that'd be wonderful. So Michael Rubin was another member of our shul, and so he went,
Actually, you did it first.
did I do it first? Okay.
Then Michael did it.
Okay, then Michael did. And then,
So instead of the whole thing being in Hebrew and just going on and on and on and on and on, it would break it up more. To put some English in and responsive readings type thing, so people were more involved.
and then we had someone step forward from our community saying, would you mind if I did some Torah? Which is reading from the Torah scroll for high holidays. And Scott goes, bring it on. And so Alan Fink was already well versed in doing this. He was trained in this when he was growing up. And so he started to read from Torah. So now you had Scott sort of divvying stuff up. And then Beth started to work with him on the cantorial part.
And when he found out that I was studying and learning, and I wanted to do part of the service with him, he goes, great, someone to play with. I mean, he was here for a long time and embraced every single change we presented to him with excitement and joy, and was so glad that this congregation was continuing, and no ego in the whole thing for him at all, which was, again, that's rare, I think. Yeah.
It shows the evolution, and so
then we started.
It's sort of homemade. It wasn't like outside coming in to keep it going.
Mm-hmm.
We've now done it from the inside.
Yeah, we've created our own service, really.
Yeah.
So the next thing I think was there's the Torah reading and there's the Haftorah reading. We started to bring in older Hebrew school students to do the Haftorah reading. And now we started to bring in people from the community. I'm tutoring people in the community, adults, to come in and do the Haftorah reading. We have certain English parts that are read by people in the congregation. So, there's this healthy moving up and down of people in the synagogue to help lead the service, which is wonderful. It's really a community service. And then I've added different things from my cantorial training, which I think people like. And it's just, it's like, wow. And we've changed books again. And the book that we have now, every page, Hebrew, transliteration, English, commentary, and learning. And people love it. Because while they're sitting there, because high holiday services go on forever, they can read and they can learn, which is what everyone wants to do anyway. A lot of people left their Jewish learning when they left after their bar and bat mitzvah, and they haven't done a lot more after. So they love to learn when they're here.
So going backwards in the evolution of our high holidays, one of the things that we had talked about, this is now 25 years ago, was the kids to come to high holidays would be, how do you sit still, fidgety, it doesn't talk to them.
They don't relate to it either.
So I decided to do a family service. And so the family service was 1 hour geared to the kids. And Actually, it was geared to the families because the parents used to be there, and even some of the members from the service used to come down. And I used to do some of the prayers. Some they were familiar with already, some were new. I used to do some stories. I used to do, I had a bag full of things that relate to the holiday. I used to have the kids come up, they had a blindfold, they had to guess what it was. And then over time it evolved that we then started, how can we incorporate this into the regular service? So we decided to, at the end of the service, some of the songs that the kids are more familiar with and the film more familiar with. So at that point, I used to leave at the time of the Haftorah, and then we'd spend an hour, and then we'd come up at the end of the service.
No, less than an hour.
And then I would come up, and all of a sudden you'd have
All these
40
kids
to
coming up.
40 to 50 people joining the service who were downstairs. And then sometimes they'd come up on the bima and lead some of the songs. And so at its peak, it was about 40 to 50 people. And then what happened over time, a lot of these kids were now grown-ups, and our Hebrew school was starting to shrink. And I'm going to say probably 8-10 years ago, we decided that there wasn't enough people to be interested.
I think it was 10 years ago you stopped doing
And
it.
some of the people who used to come there now are comfortable being upstairs. Some of those parents
Yep.
are upstairs now, they're comfortable. And some of the older kids who used to come upstairs.
Well, then and then the other thing, the next part, after describing people coming up for the end, is you did take part of the service, the 3-part service, and you did gear that for families.
Yeah.
So people would come up for that and do it with the whole congregation. And actually the whole congregation liked it. It involved reading a story from a picture book. Everyone loved it. They just loved it. So, yeah. But it's, who's going to talk about it? So this building was built in the 1880s as an Episcopal church. And you can tell by the windows, the shape of the windows. And when you go into the sanctuary, if you look around the top of it, you'll see rosette carvings in the wood. And apparently that's another sign that it's a Christian thing. It's like taking a cross and softening the corners. And there was a big stained glass window. I don't know what it was actually, but they also replaced that with a Jewish star when they took it over.
In 1906.
1906, it became a synagogue. Before that, people had been meeting in people's homes and having services there. And apparently everything was just right for them to buy the building and take it over. And the Episcopal Church moved over to where Seeds of Hope is now. That was an Episcopal church until just a few years ago when they turned into Seeds of Hope instead. There also was a bell tower, and if you are in the sanctuary and you look up in the back, there's a door up on the second floor. Well, now it goes to nowhere. It used to go to the bell tower, and I believe they took that down also when it became a synagogue. So we had a marvelous, marvelous exhibit in 2006 at the Sacco Museum. Jenny Ranovich is like our historian for the congregation, and she put together an amazing exhibit for our 100-year anniversary. And she followed the businesses and how they were over the years, the Jewish businesses in downtown Biddeford. She followed the families and which family married who and who changed their name. Apparently the Osher family used to be Osherovitz, and they shortened it to Osher to be Americanized. And the whole people here, which I didn't know, really did the peddling to, what do I want to say, store process. We had someone ask, well, the Jewish community ran the mills, right? And we're like, no, they couldn't speak English. No, they didn't run the mills. What they did was they sold to the people who ran the mills or who worked in the mills. And there's a pretty classic story of how you start as a peddler with a backpack and as many things as you can carry in your backpack. And then after that, you get a wagon that you push, or like a wheelbarrow maybe. And then after that, you make it something bigger that you carry around till you finally get a horse who carries a cart, which you can keep making bigger until finally you buy a store and you have a store. And that's what happened with
Blackwood.
Halakowicz and Feinstein. We used to have the building Feinstein. You still see Osher on a couple of the buildings in downtown Biddeford. There was a kosher butcher here. Because if you do keep kosher, your meat has to be raised and it has to be slaughtered and it has to be processed a certain way. So there was a kosher butcher here. And what else do I want to say? There was a really thriving population, and people lived around the synagogue because when it's the Sabbath, you can't drive. You're not supposed to drive. So they would live in close proximity so they could walk to services on the Sabbath.
So the building, to accommodate it being Jewish, some of the things we do know, as Beth mentioned, the Jewish star was put up there. And the other thing is down in the function room now, which is called the Shapiro room, was a mikveh. And a mikveh is a pool that is used for cleansing the body at different times or cleansing dishes. And that was a big deal to have a mikveh in your community. Somewhere along the line, it was no longer being used.
Well, wait, mikveh has to be collected rainwater. It's not just something that you can pour the tap and have it. It has to be collected rainwater.
Running water.
Rainwater. Not running water, but rainwater. And the Orthodox women would use it every month after their menstrual period to cleanse themselves. And actually the Orthodox couples don't have relations for that time of the month. And then after the cleansing, they're able to have relations again. It also, like as David was mentioning, you bring your dishes before Passover, and you would kosher your dishes because it's a whole different kind of kosher for Passover than it is the rest of the year. There can't be any leavening. Everything has to be processed properly. You can't just buy anything off the shelf. And not only has to be marked kosher, it has to be marked kosher for Passover. Yes, so look this year for Passover stuff in Hannaford, you'll see.
So at some point, the community transitioned and decided that people weren't using the mikveh anymore, so they wound up getting rid of it, level and making it into a floor. And then we heard they used to have incredible parties here. And they had dances. They had, you could see they had all the kitchenware that you'd have, just at least 100 or 200.
Well, it was a kosher kitchen. It is a kosher kitchen now, but now it's just a kosher dairy kitchen. But it used to be kosher kitchen. Here's the dairy, over here's the meat, and two completely different sets of dishes, and ceiling to floor dishes, big plates, little plates, bowls, cups, everything that they used to have dinners here. And they used to have dances, and the story is the whole community would come, not just the Jewish community, because they would have live music. They'd have a band.
So just some of the things that have happened to this building over time since we've been here that we've seen. One is making it handicapped accessible. So there used to be these granite stairs just in the center that you'd have to walk up. And so now there is a cement ramp. They put in a elevator. We put in an elevator to make it handicap accessible. And then some of the things that we've decided to just keep going. We have recarpeted the main sanctuary. We put a new floor down in the function room. We got some pews that were donated to us from the Sherry Tefillah Orthodox Synagogue in Portland that closed down. So So we changed pews, and it's much more comfortable. We're in the process now of looking at renovating the kitchen.
We
What-
created this library.
This library.
This was just a one room. In fact, I think it probably was the women's section and or the Hebrew school met in there for service, you know. But we put in the wall and started to create this library. So that's been over
That's
the
nice.
past, I don't know, what
20
more you
plus
say,
years.
20 years, I think
20
she
years,
said.
the
Yeah.
Samuel Osher Library.
Now, one of the things that I saw is, I think, is it Friday, that in Biddeford City Square, there's going to be a lighting of the menorah and a tree. Is that something new?
Yes, first year.
Johnny Nathanson of Toby and John, made this giant menorah. It's downstairs on the stage if you want to see it. It's gigantic, it's heavy, and he made it for Christmas Prelude in Kennebunkport. So it was taken down there a few times to be with their lighting. It hasn't been used that way in a long time, and this is the first year it'll be at the Biddeford lighting. And it's the first time our Hanukkah party is on the Biddeford holiday event calendar. So that happens on Sunday.
So what's something that you would want the Biddeford community to know about?
That it's really a new thing that we're venturing out more into community now. And it's really based on resources, I think. We were working so hard just to have this place be viable. And since I was ordained last year, the community did hire me part-time as a spiritual leader. And so I feel part of that is connecting with the community at large. And so I've been part of this interfaith clergy luncheon that happens once a month. And every time you do that, I think the rewards come back double-fold. So when the whole shooting happened in Pittsburgh, it happened on Saturday morning, and Sunday morning we decided we needed to have a service here, Sunday night. So we put it together in a day and assembled the prayers and who was going to do what, just David and myself. And the sanctuary was packed. And it was packed with the Jewish community as well as other Christian churchgoers or just members of the community. A lot of clergy were here. Just to be part of it and to say we're with you, and it was just very mind-boggling. It was touching. It was really touching.
Oh,
And then 2 days later, there was a vigil at Bet Ha'am in South Portland, and I was part of that also. There were 1,600 people there. 400 had to stay outside because they couldn't fit in the building anymore. And that was also an amazing event where the different clergy contributed to the vigil, and each one had such a unique voice and really something important to say that was different than anyone else. It was just, and my music was different than this other group who, did some music, and it was just amazing. And again, there was a lot of clergy there. The bishop was there from the area, and a lot of support, which is just really, really nice. So it makes me want to do more community events, you see, and get out with the Biddeford community for the tree lighting and menorah lighting.
so that probably leads me to my next question, which is, what is your vision for what the future looks like?
I think we keep well, first of all, I just want to go back just a little bit and say, in the traditional synagogues, you have a leader, whether it be the president or whether it be the spiritual leader or whatever, who decides how things are going to be and tells everyone this is the way we're doing it. I think because we were not paid for so long, and maybe not confident for so long, we never did that. We assembled people and said, what do you want? What's important? What do you want? And then worked to make that happen. And that's not a traditional Jewish religious institutional approach. that we're facilitators for what the community wants. I think that's really important. So I think we're reassessing right now what the community wants. We're doing services more often since I was hired. The community events more. And I think we're trying to think about going in the direction of adult education more because of our children's group. See, it's funny, it's like the children's group has gotten smaller, but it doesn't feel like there's people out there that are not coming. It just feels like there's not other kids out there at this point. Whereas before, there were kids out there, but they didn't have anything to go to. And once they had something to go to, they came.
Mm-hmm.
But it felt like the surge in the numbers that now has dwindled. So it's just keeping our ears open to what people want and thinking of ways that we can help them bring more Judaism into their life.
You have something to add in terms of what is your vision for what you'd like to see?
To me, that's not the question I would answer. So I feel like right now we are, in some ways, the elders that when the board that was here before, we're not there, but we're saying what happens next with the shul.
And who's going to do it?
And who's going to do it? And one of our goals is we've created a strong board of about 14 people
Great board.
who are very active. So it's not just Beth and I cleaning up the floors and setting up everything every night, which is what we used to do. So we have a core of people, we have people interested, so it's still thriving. It's not the 25 people who are there, but it's, keep the light burning and to get things going, because there will be another generation, and we want this place to be there. There will be another Sunday school and Hebrew school. It may not be how we see it or envision it, but the importance that I feel, I think Beth shares, is the importance of religion in today's world, the crazy world that's going on. And I think that you'll have a whole generation saying, where do we go for our kids to be raised with these values, to have a community? I think there's a void right now in that it's just going to, the pendulum will swing again, and we want to make sure there's a home for them in the same way that the previous generation has this home for us. I was just very thankful for. There was no mortgage on this building. People says, how do you make ends meet? There was no mortgage. We had, our expenses because of that are not very high. So my vision is that there's going to be another generation that's going to do what we're going to do. And what we focus on right now is what's important to who's here, and just keep our ears and eyes open, and hopefully keep opportunities open for people who are interested in doing whatever they feel will bring our community closer.
But it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel different. It feels like that's what we've always done, is sort of not maybe directly, but indirectly say to people, what's important to you about Judaism? And how can we continue to make it relevant to everyday life? We do that in Hebrew school, we do that in services. We now are having a Torah study, and that's one of the major thrusts of that. How is this still relevant? Why is it important? So I also tutor kids for Bar Bat Mitzvah, and it's an amazing experience. It's just amazing. You have this kid for 9 months to a year, where you're meeting with them individually at a time when they don't feel very confident about anything. I mean, it's a brilliant, brilliant time to do something that celebrates this child, And especially a couple of them lately have just been amazing in the way that they've blossomed through it. So it's just, I think, because of thinking about what's important to them about it, not what's important to me. what's important to me is important to me, but what's important to them and their family. And that's what you pull out of it the most.
Well, I know that you have a time restriction, so I want to thank you, Beth, for everything that you've shared and some great insights, and thank you for your work.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Okay, I am here now with Dr. David Strassler after Beth left, and thought we might spend a little bit of time talking about your experience as a family physician in Biddeford. If we could go back a little bit to when you first started your practice, you were readily accepted into the community. How did you get the word out? How did you build your patient panel? How did that work out?
So, first and foremost, when I came to the community, my priority was that how could I raise a family and be a doctor? And when I was looking at where to practice, I was looking for not working 24/7, being on call with other people. And so I wound up with 3 other doctors who were solo practitioners who, at the time, this is what we did. We did office practice, we did hospital practice, we did nursing homes, we did deliveries, we did home visits. We were on call every 4th night. We were on call every 4th weekend. When we were on call, we'd be called into the emergency room to see people. We were called to be admitting people. We'd take phone calls, people at home who had questions. And so that's what I was sort of looking forward to. I was very, very excited. I felt I was very well trained from my residency to do full breadth family practice. Once I figured out where I was going to practice on Franklin Street, then Beth and I went ahead and renovated the area. We mapped out exam rooms. There was the waiting room, the business area, my office. So the next step was I had to hire somebody. And in residency, they give you courses of how to do these types of things. And so I put an ad in the newspaper, and the first person I had to hire was a front office person. And I was so blessed that the person I hired worked for me for almost 30 years, Paulette Wagner. So Paulette was working at the time with another physician at the time, and she had a baby, and then that physician hired someone else. So she's looking for a job. So she already worked in the field for several years. So now understand, when I first was starting practice, I thought I'll be hiring people who share my values and my political values and all this stuff. And that was not part of the interview process. Paulette, although we share a lot of values, we're from different backgrounds. She was French-Canadian, more local from the area. I was from away. And I still remember we got some of the first equipment we got a typewriter. And she would type up we had charts. And so I had a filing cabinet, and I had this cockamamie way to do charts that I was trained with that everyone sort of scratched their head. It was a family chart. So everyone in the family was all in the same folder. Each had their own section, but they're all the same folder. And so in the same household, there wouldn't be like a mother and daughter in different places, but it'd be the wife and the husband and the children will always be the same. So if I saw one, I could, if there's other questions, I'd have the chart to see the other. It got sort of interesting because not everyone had the same last name. But Paulette knew so many people in the community, and then I got to know them, that you sort of knew who they were. You knew who was related to everyone else. So it was like going, where is this chart? You knew who their father was. And I used to dictate my records, and Paulette used to then type them up. And she used to do that when she wasn't busy with patients checking in and checking out. And she used to handle the books. So going backwards, so how did I get my first patients? And so I had the signage out, and even before I was, so the funny story is, even before I started practice, the door was open, a guy knocked on the door, he saw my sign, it was like a few days before I was to start, and he came in and he had crabs, which are general lice, and he came in and he said, could you help me? And I had a prescription pad, and I said, sure. So that was our first patient, even before I advertised. And so I'm really not sure. Advertising in the newspaper was not something that was done. It was more of word of mouth. So there's an article about me in the Courier, and I still have a copy of that, introduced me to the community. And then when people go to the emergency room, they're looking for a doctor, they used to say, go see, just a sign, go to see this doctor or this doctor. And then just by word of mouth, if people liked you, and it's still not a very big community, you know, people, by word of mouth, you see family members or friends, try him out, we like him. At the time, there was as I mentioned, Dr. Haas was retiring, so I got some of his patients. Then there was another physician who stopping practice, I got his patients, some of his patients. The one thing that I remember, so when Dr. Haas retired, he had about, I'm going to say 6 or 8 people in nursing homes. And he asked if I would take care of them. And what blew me away when I made my first visit to one of them, this was at the Troll. I was going to see her, and I said, this is what I've been waiting for. I'm gonna meet this person, and I know that I will take care of that person till they die. Up to that point, when I was in training, you take care of people, but then after 3 years, you probably have no relationship with them again unless something happened during that time. So that was like, this is what I came here for. So I remember another experience I had. This is the Times, and I look back now, I go, I cannot believe it. I was driving by St. Joseph's Church in my car. I could have been in practice maybe within a year, and a boy got hit by a car. He's on his bicycle, and he got scraped up. His bicycle was mangled, and I stopped, and I saw that he's going to need some stitches, and I said, get in the car, I'm going to bring you to the emergency room. I put his bike in the back of my car, I brought him to the emergency room, I got his parents' name and number, I called his mother up, and she came over. Now, who would do, I mean, no one would even think of that, but it was like, by the time that you call an ambulance, they get there, and all this, so, but that was the community at the time. People didn't think about, you know, what's a liability, what's going to happen to you. So anyway, that does like another story of being part of the community.
The community must have been, was it much of an adjustment for you? Because Biddeford is very different than where you grew up or where you went to school.
Yeah, it was, but people were people. And I remember sitting at my desk. So I figured that Maine doesn't get very hot. I remember the first year I was sitting at my desk, I was sitting there, and my nurse comes in, and she goes, we have to get something, we get some fast, it's so hot, it's 100 degrees outside. I said, what are you talking about? I got on the phone and I called the time and temperature from the bank. It was 100 degrees outside. I said, we need air conditioning. So my in-laws had this big air conditioner that they put in my waiting room. I got a couple more. The other thing I remember about Biddeford at that time was you just had to press 4 numbers to dial people. You didn't have to do the whole thing. It was like, that's how small it was. So over time, my practice people just kept coming. I kept charts going. I dictated my charts. I took care of people, all types, in those days, so if I'm in the office seeing people and someone is going to be hospitalized, I left the office. I went to the hospital, admitted them, came back. At lunchtime, I may go there. Someone's delivering a baby, I left, and they were just rescheduled. And people just sort of, that's just the way it is, which is very different now. It's people will be very upset if they have an appointment and then you leave the office to say, wait a second, I have an appointment. Time has become so valuable, but so I remember so some of the memories I have that was besides just taking care of people in the office, was doing deliveries. It was so nice to build up my practice, to take care of a couple, to follow through pregnancy, take care of the baby, the next baby, watch them growing up, and then all of a sudden I'm taking care of the grandparents. For me, family practice lent itself to what was most interesting to me. In some ways, science is easy, but the dynamics is a challenge of what goes on that has always been thrown to me, and knowing the history behind people. To know, so when I would see a mother with their baby, I'd be also talking about her father who's in the hospital I'm taking care of, and how that interacts with what's going on. I just had that experience today. I'm taking care of someone who I haven't been taking care of for a long time. A gentleman is in his early 80s who I just diagnosed with metastatic lung cancer to his spine, and I've been trying to work through that. He's now in the medical center, and I just talked to his son. His son called and wanted to keep me abreast what's going on. And so someone was added to my schedule today, and it's another person in my practice's wife, and she came in with a respiratory illness, and I knew exactly what her worries were because I take care of her husband. I know it's got into the husband. And so it definitely, so half the visit was talking about her husband. And to me, that's what it's all about. It has more, I mean, any doctor could take care of respiratory illness. Not everyone could interact with and try to help work through with her the conversation of, have they talked about hospice? And what does that mean? And what are the questions you need to ask the doctors in the hospital? One of the sad things, I'll go through some of the history of my practice, but jumping forward, one of the sad things in medicine that's happened is not practicing in a hospital and there being a hospitalist. Because I've lost some of the continuity of taking care of patients when they're at their sickest, and that's in the hospital. And so, having had to give some of that up, it's not the same when someone comes to your office afterwards for follow-up. I sort of don't know exactly what went on or some of the changes that went on. So that has been a loss for myself, I think, for primary care, the continuity. In the same way, I'm not doing nursing home practice anymore, seeing someone through many times to the end of their life.
Now, where that relationship building is so critical, how did you find it a challenge because of being, especially when you first started in a community where a good part of the population had another language? Was that, how did you surmount that?
Paulette spoke French.
Okay,
So if they did not speak English, Paulette would come in and translate, or I'd have to have a family member. Many of the people who lived in this community who did not speak English saw Dr. Fortier. Now, Dr. Fortier, I called him Fortier until I was corrected. No, it's Fortier. It's French, like other French names, like Belfay or Boucher. I had to learn some of that. But in any event, when I first came to the community, before I started practicing, I went to different doctors' offices, and I went to Dr. Fortier's office, which was on a side street. I could probably find it now, but I walked into his office, and there his waiting room was a black and white TV, and the old couches, and very sweet man, very, very nice man. When I started practicing, I just was who I was. People were going to either like me or not. I never wore a white jacket. I never wore a tie. And if someone needed that to be comfortable, it just wasn't who I was. And there were, you could tell when people walk in and they'd start to get to know me in the beginning, you could see they're sort of looking at the corner of their eye, like, who is this? And over time, I still remember when I see these people, and I remember some of those early interactions. Now I'm like their best friends, but before it was like, who is this person who's not from here but from away? If I can, I just want to tell you some of the history behind what I saw happen to me in family practice, because I think in some ways it's representative of the times. So here I am, a solo practitioner. I got my own loan, I developed my own practice, I had my own charting system, paper charts, I had a secretary, I had a nurse, I paid the bills, I had to figure out my own salary, I had to figure out how much to charge for office visits. I had to, if I wanted, I could write off anything I wanted to. If I felt someone couldn't afford it, I had socially consciously. I had made a decision not to have any prescription, any sample medications that I'd be handing out to people that would influence what medicine I prescribe. None of my magazines had anything about tobacco or alcohol in them. So I did that. Do you have my piece of paper that I gave you? Dates?
oh yes.
Because it's helpful. This one. So I was in solo practice from '82, and then in 1988, Beth and I decided to buy an old Victorian house on Graham Street. I still wanted to be in downtown, but I wanted to own our own place, and it had to have a parking, which is not very easy in Biddeford, especially now. But in any event, I came across the house on Graham Street, and it had a yard that I envisioned I could make into a parking lot. So in '88, the same year that we delivered our second son, Beth renovated the house. I pretty much told her what I needed, and we used the first floor, and the second floor we wound up renting out to some people, different people for small businesses, but mainly it was the first floor. We put a lot of money into changing that place, upgrading it and changing it to a doctor's office. And then in 1994, probably a few years before that, Medicare started to talk about billing by computer. And if you bill by computer, you'll get your money quicker. And I didn't know how to use a computer. We were not computerized. Paulette was not computer savvy. And then the second thing that happened was, so my patients were coming in and said, I can't see you anymore. And I said, why not? Says, well, my insurance company's an HMO and you're not on the list. Well, I was on some other lists, but not their list, because they, for whatever reason. And I said, my God, I'm not gonna be able to see people just, I even said, it doesn't even make sense for you to see me, because if I don't charge you, you're still gonna need someone else to, if you're hospitalized. I said, I have to do something here. So there was a group in Portland of family doctors and one in Biddeford who decided to collectively get together to become a group. Just by scale, they can contract with these HMOs and handle more of their own patients. These are people who were in solo practice of 2 people. And I heard about them. And so that was a really critical time, and I wanted to talk to you about this. This was in 1994. My oldest son was 10 and 6. And I had to make a decision of joining a group or leaving town. And I say that because I felt it was like one of those junctures. Not that I wanted to leave, but so Beth and I actually went to counseling at the time. Not because we were having trouble as much as we were having trouble figuring out what to do. And then we went to someone I had met many years before who helped impaired physicians, but also helped people with their values. John Henry Pfifferling, who's a friend of mine. And in Durham, North Carolina, we went there for a 3-day weekend and had intensive sessions with him and his staff about what are our core values to make the decision. So what was fascinating was we could move anywhere. I could get a job as a doctor anywhere. Beth could get a job teaching, but now she's a parent more. And so why would we stay here? Because of the synagogue. We felt we'd not be able to find a place like this anywhere else. And we were only here 12 years at that time, but we felt so connected to what we were already doing in the community that we felt that that was a reason to move forward and to stay. So then, by developing my core values, and Beth worked with me on it, I interviewed Family Care Associates, this group that had just started within a year, to see if I'd be part of it. And I went through my values with them, and they're like, what else is new? We were all family doctors. We all had the same interest. It wasn't like I was sitting down with a cardiologist. I mean, the interest was taking care of patients and taking care of ourselves. And so I joined them. And there were about 14 of us, and we used to have, I was on the board, half of us were on the board, and we used to get together once a week, and we used to talk about business. We had one person who was our administrator who used to help us, and we used to be able to contract with HMOs, and all of a sudden I was able to take care of more patients. They computerized me, so I didn't have to do any of that stuff. I still had paper charts, which everyone sort of had their own practice, but they had an administrator who oversaw it, and you could work through that person for the insurance industry. But I will tell you, that was the first time I grew a beard. And in the Jewish tradition, when someone dies, you don't shave. And I was in mourning. I was in mourning that I lost my independence to the insurance industry. It was like the first sign. So, but I got over that. And the practice was great. Paulette still worked with me. My nurse, Debbie, who worked with me for a long time, was with me. I had another nurse work. I mean, the staff was fine, because it really still came out of my pocket as no one said who you could have or not, but it was still my piece of the pie that I paid out of, which was fine. So we went along like that for about 4 years. And everything was hunky-dory. But then we realized that we did a very poor job of contracting. That we were still getting the basic contracts and how much money the insurance company was paying us through HMO, which you get paid a certain amount per patient. And we found out that larger groups were doing much better than we were. So we approached, in Brunswick, the Bowdoin Medical Group. And they were also a group of primary care doctors there. And so either we approached them or they approached us. We just talked about, why don't we merge? Because they had a physician who was a very savvy administrator who's getting great contracts. And so we merged with them. Not only did we merge, but we computerized, and now we're making our records, electronic medical records, through their system they developed. So now all my charts are going away. Now, one of the interesting things about charts, where I told you I had family charts, I love that piece. The hard part was if I pulled a chart, or anyone pulled a chart, and then you needed it later, you spend a long time trying to find it. Or if it was misplaced, and then you had to find it, so the beauty of computerization was we no longer had that headache of trying to find a chart. So in any event, so we joined Bowdoin Medical Group in 1999. In order to join Family Care Associates, I had to pay $2,000. In order to join Bowdoin Medical Group, I had to pay $100,000. And so you could take out a bank loan, and then over time you pay it off, but you had 100,000 shares. It wasn't like you lost the money, you still had shares in the company. And so the other thing that Bowdoin Medical Group did was they bought everything in my office. They bought all my equipment and everything, which came up to about, I'm going to say, plus my records, they bought patient records. When all was said and done, I think it was $65,000. So I had, they talk about people selling the practices. I basically sold my practice but continued practicing. And I also had that money sort of put away. And so, and then over 2 or 3 years, I paid that off through just taking money out of my salary. And so that brought us to about 30 to 35 providers. It was doctors and nurse practitioners, physician assistants. And by that time, I was no longer solo. I had a nurse practitioner, I had another doctor, I had some doctors working with me, so I had more people in the office. And then at some point, I can't remember when it was, maybe the year 2000, I outgrew my space, so we opened up the upstairs and that became part of the office also, because there were 3 of us there. So we had some exam rooms downstairs and exam rooms upstairs. And if the people who couldn't walk upstairs because of a disability, they used to be seen downstairs. So we had the front waiting room, we had a business office, we had exam rooms downstairs, we had a lab downstairs for blood drawing and small labs. Upstairs we had exam rooms and a kitchen and the administrative office and doctor's offices. And so, and then we did that till 2009, when Bowdoin Medical Group realized that now Medicare was asking for more bells and whistles. They were asking for more information and data, and in order for us to do that, we would have to purchase a whole different software system and invest a lot more money. And at this point, Bowdoin Medical Group had no loans at all. It was all internal. And so at that point we said, we need to move on. We just can't do it on our own anymore. And so at the time, we were a very, very strong, very well-respected group of about 35 providers, and we went out and interviewed. I was on the board of all these organizations. We went ahead and interviewed May Medical Center, Mercy Hospital, and Martin's Point. And all three of them wanted us. And they're all willing to pay a good amount of money for us to join. Our 100,000 shares was worth what? And so after interviewing the three, and we thought they were all three viable, we decided Martin's Point because it was already primary care. And so when all is said and done, I made a nice profit for my 100,000 shares to buy into the organization, and now for the first time I was an employee. Before that I was an employer because it was run by the physicians. And so I've been part of Martin's Point now, like, believe it or not, since 2010. And so the transition was a new medical record system, a different culture, is much more of a business culture. There was a lot of overhead for administration and other resources that they sort of made up with for some other things that they're doing to help capture money through Medicare and other insurance companies. My staff pretty much went along, whoever I had, and then there's more staffing. And then as we sort of outgrew my space, the Graham Street, which me and my wife owned. And so about 3+ years ago, we moved to our present location on Barrow Road. And then we put the office for sale. And now in Barrow Road we have 5 practitioners. We have at least 20 staff working for us. We have, everything's computerized. It's a very nice open space. So backtracking a little bit about my skill set. So here I was trained as doing everything in family practice. And then in the year, I'm going to say 1990, I picked up a new skill set, which was doing osteopathic manipulation. I saw some people in the community seeing osteopaths or chiropractors. I grew up in a time when osteopaths, chiropractors lumped together and viewed as quacks, that they really didn't do any good for people, versus allopathic MD doctors. But I met this doctor, Bill Wyatt, up in the Yarmouth area, and he spoke a language I did not understand. He called somatic dysfunction. All I knew was family dysfunction. And I watched him do it, and I was referring people to him. He was a master at what he did. He's like the grandfather of osteopathy. And one day he finally said, I was talking to him, he said, would you stop referring people to me and just start doing this? And I said, how am I going to do this? He says, well, get trained. He says, why don't you just go to University of New England? So I said, why not? So I went to University of New England. One summer, I took 2 days a week out of my practice and went to classes for 8 weeks. And then that was with students who were going to matriculate to the second year. And then the fall I did the second year osteopathy. And I had the advantage, I already had patients who I could practice on. And so I've been doing osteopathy since that time. I probably do more than 95% of osteopaths. And it's a great skill because I get to touch people and do something besides just give medicine. So that was one of the first skills I picked up. The next skill I picked up was in training, I learned how to do sigmoidoscope exams, which is looking at the lower colon with what they call rigid scope. And then they came up with what they call a flexible scope. And the flexible scope, instead of going to 20 to 25 centimeters, I don't know if you want to hear all this, but I'll tell you anyway. You can go to 60 centimeters, and it was more patient comfortable, and I did it in my office. So that was another skill I picked up that I'll get back to. And I always loved to work with my hands, so I did a lot of office surgery on top of already doing OB, obstetrics. I also like to do first assist for my patients who had surgery, so I'd go in with the orthopedist to do hips and knees. I used to go with the general surgeons to do gallbladders and appendixes and hernias. I was also doing D&Cs on patients who had vaginal bleeding after menopause. Women who had miscarriages, I was doing their D&Es, it's called dilation and evacuation. So I was doing full spectrum procedures there also. But what happened was, the next thing that happened was I hired a woman who wanted to do OB. I think she had a fellowship in it. And I wound up giving her deliveries so she'd keep busy, and before I knew it, I was doing less deliveries. Where I used to try to do, I'm going to say average six to 8 a month. All of a sudden I was only doing 1 to 2 a month. And I started to get a little uncomfortable doing deliveries because I wasn't doing so much. I said, you know, that's not okay. So I said, you know what, I'm going to give it up. I'll let her do it. And then there was sort of like a void in my practice of, I said, I need to do something different here or else. And then around the year 2000, Medicare decided that they were going to pay for colonoscopies. And my patients who I was doing sigmoidoscopies on were starting to ask about having colonoscopies done, which made sense. And so I said, maybe I'll do colonoscopies. So, which was not your usual. And in family practice, there's always been this belief that if you're competent to do something, then you should be able to do it in medicine. But that's not the rule. As a rule, it's more of a, if you have to be certified by some higher power to say you're able to do it. So in any event, to make a long story short, I wound up taking a class to do colonoscopies. It was a 3-day class for whoever, it was a national class. So it was family doctors, it was surgeons, it was internists, and it was in Portland, the class, actually, to think of it, the first class I went to. And then in order to be able to do it, I needed to have someone mentor me to be able to do colonoscopies. So this is the politics of medicine, and I'll share this with you. So there was 2 GI doctors at the time, I think, in Biddeford doing it. And I knew them very well. They knew me. I referred to them. I would like to think I had a very good reputation in the community. And so I approached one of them about doing colonoscopies, was not thrilled. And then I approached the head of the medical staff, and I asked him, can I do colonoscopies at this hospital? He says, I don't know. So I had to bring it to the to the department. And they said, well, we probably can't legally not let him do it, but he needs to be competent to do it. Well, he needs to do 50 colonoscopies and 25 biopsies, and then have someone sign off to say he's competent to do it. So he told me that. I said, oh, good, there's a chance. It's like there's a movie with Jim Carrey, with the woman said, he said, do you think you ever love me? And he said, 1 in a million chance. He goes, great, I got a chance. So I felt like they put it on paper, now I just had to do it. Now, part of it is like, first I had to get someone to mentor me, and I had someone to do that in the community who did colonoscopies as an internist, Stephen Doan. He was graceful enough to say he would do it. Then I had to have 50 guinea pigs who said they'd be willing to have me do their colonoscopy. And so, so I asked patients, would you mind if I do it? I have someone who'll be proctoring me. They said, fine. Then there were other people in my group from Portland who supported me, who referred people to me also to Biddeford. So the first time I did a colonoscopy, after having the training, and Dr. Doan was overseeing me, it must take me, it might have been an hour and 15 minutes, maybe even longer. And we scheduled a morning, on a Wednesday morning, he had off, and I took time out to do it. And then I would say for the first 3 weeks I did one. And then the next ones I do 2. And then within 9 months I did 50. So by the time I was on 35, he didn't even really have to mentor me anymore. And again, I had some skill already doing sigmoidoscopy, so I had some of the skill. So in any event, I was on my 49th one, and I had only done 15 biopsies, and I needed to do 25. And sure enough, one of my patients that do a colonoscopy had eight biopsies to be done. So I was like, wow, I'm there. So now I had the numbers, and I approached the chief medical staff with the letter and the numbers. In 9 months, he goes, you did it. I said, yep. He goes, I guess you're credentialed. So I don't think the GIs were thrilled, but they knew who I was, and they were willing to help out if I needed help, because I needed help sometimes. So I did that for about 3 years, and then I realized that a lot of the people who would be my referral base were sending people to Biddeford. They asked me, could you do it in Portland? I said, I don't know, I'll have to see. So I went to Maine Medical Center, to the family practice department. I asked them, could I do colonoscopies here? Well, the family practice department were thrilled that I'd be interested, but they had to go to the GI department. And GI department was like, well, but family practice was very supportive, so then they had to come up, so what would I need to be credentialed? So they said, you need to do 150 colonoscopies and 50 biopsies. There's 25 biopsies before. And I said, so that's what I have to do to get credentialed? And you need a letter from a GI. I said, okay. So I gathered all my data, and I presented to them because I already did 180 in Biddeford, and I had a GI doctor I work with who's willing to say he's competent, and all of a sudden GI doctor's going, oh my God. So the story continues that I think my second time there, I ran into the previous head of the department, and I hadn't seen him for years. I used to refer to him a lot. And I said hello to him, and he recognized me, and we just talked a little bit. He says, so what are you doing here? I said, oh, it's my colonoscopy time. He looks at me and says, what? I said, yeah, I'm doing colonoscopies. He says, when did that happen? He didn't know about it. And then he sort of walked away. And I'm sure he went right to the head of the department. Then I saw him a week later. He says, well, now I understand you're doing colonoscopy, so I'm sure you're not doing any biopsies. I said, whatever. I mean, it was irrelevant to, I mean, he basically was of the opinion of, I should be doing them in the first place, no less any biopsies. Well, if you can't do a biopsy with colonoscopy, I'm not sure why you should be doing them, or it's really removing polyps and stuff. But in any event, that was in the year, my first one was in 2000, tissue. So at this point, I've done about 5,000 colonoscopies. So it's sort of become my subspecialty. I could do upwards of 22 a week now in Portland and in Biddeford. And that sort of, in some ways, has replaced my obstetrics and my hospital practice. So I still am getting to be in the hospital and getting to take care of some patients in the hospital with a different issue. So it's like the evolution of what I did. To basically to mix it up. I always have to sort of figure out something else to do.
Mm-hmm.
But still, my passion is taking care of families, being in the office, and people I know, even people that I'm just meeting, and just spending time just talking to them. The medical stuff now is easy. It's the what's going on in people's lives that are a little more difficult, and working them through family transitions, landmark things that go on with families.
Are you seeing any big changes in that, or pretty much it's similar trends that you've experienced your entire career?
So the trends that are different, one is we can keep people alive much longer than we used to. We have a lot of chronic illness. It wasn't as much of an issue. Congestive heart failure, lung conditions are some of the big ones. People living longer and becoming just more disabled. That's one of the changes. The other is chronic pain used to not be an issue when I was in training. It's become a very, very big issue now. It's led to a lot of unfortunate drug overdoses. It's led to people being addicted to medicine, people's perception of pain. People used to just live with pain. It was just part of life. I mean, people in the mills here used to work with pain. It's just to make a living. It's just what happened. Now it's, if you have pain, then you're on disability or you can't work. So it's different. The other differences are just medications. There are some wonderful medicines that have helped people live better lives or longer lives. But now there's a lot of more administrative work with getting okays with different medicines, and getting okays for people to get different treatments. When I first started practice, if you wanted someone to see a cardiologist, you make a phone call, they were there. You didn't have to have an insurance company to say, is this okay? That whole thing has changed.
Have you seen any major changes in the community itself? One of the things that I like to ask people is, because we want to keep this community vibrant. How would you describe Biddeford to others?
So an example of a Biddeford change was when I first came here, Biddeford was a football powerhouse. It was very strong and had a very big high school. Now the high school's pretty small. You have the Class B. It was very hard for them to go to Class B. That's changed. There used to be a very, very strong French-Canadian community. And now the children, the grandchildren, many of them still live here, but they have no connection to Catholicism in the same way that in Judaism, a lot of the families aren't practicing Judaism. The downtown shopping has changed. Now you have Biddeford Crossing, people go to the main mall. So for the mills have closed. They closed even before I got here. Ever since I've been here, people talk about the mills are going to be attracting new businesses downtown, and it always seemed like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. There's always this feeling that it's just on the cusp of a resurgence, but it's just not quite there yet, and you just hope that something's going to happen. So that's really changed the flavor of just Main Street since I've been here. even you have more restaurants down there, but you have less businesses. You used to have furniture stores in downtown. You used to have Rennie's was more came in after I was here, so it wasn't a landmark, but there's some other landmarks there. Then you had the crazy, you had Merck, you have this waste disposal place in your downtown. It's like, who gave who money? And it just sort of slowed down any growth in Biddeford. It was unbelievable. And fortunately, it's not part of our community anymore, but it really took some steps back. There's more, it used to be, as a French Canadian, it's much more homogenized, which is nice. There's a lot more different people in the community of all religions, nationalities. St. Francis College, which had just changed when I got here to University of New England, has been growing, has been adding more culture to the community, more students. It's changed some of the flavor to the community. Again, I'm from away, so I'm not really sure people who've lived here all their lives, how they're envisioning some of this. It's like we're losing our community. There's still some, Alex's Pizza's still here, and people will frequent that, but there are other places here. But there's no question that there are less, the schools are smaller. I mean, used to have 3 parochial schools here, now you have 1 St. James. Used to have 3 churches here, now you have just 1 St. Joseph's. It's, in a sense, what's going on in Biddeford is no different than what's going on in the rest of the nation. It's just, it's a little slower to happen. So.
And I guess in closing, I'd ask, what is something that you'd want to make sure that people take away from hearing your story?
I have to tell you a story that I wish Beth was here, but I'll tell it anyway. Gift to the Magi. Are you familiar with that story? The gift. So Beth and I had a story of the Gift of the Magi. So when we were, this is bringing in my values and my Judaism. Beth and I had moved here, excuse me, this is when I was in my residency. This is in 1980. I just finished my internship, and Beth and I went skiing in northern New Hampshire. And we were taking a break from skiing, and we're sitting around this circular fireplace, fire pit. And we still, to this day, don't agree exactly what happened, but I said to her, I love you so much that I want to marry you. Now again, we met 8 years before this, and Beth said, I want to convert. And she will say that she said she's going to convert first, and I want to say that I said that you mean so much to me that it does make a difference. So what it said to me is we shared so many values, even though we were of different religions, the basis values were the same. And we then had a lot of hard work to make it work. And I will say that it made our marriage stronger because we did all that work ahead of time. People would do that work once they got married or whatever. We did all that work ahead of time to figure out what are our values. And we had known each other for a very long time. But through it, what's happened with me for my family, for my profession, for my religion, it's all been tied into all the same. It just taught me to respect people, to always treat people as I want to be treated. In my profession, when someone would come to see me, I would say, what would I want if I was in that person's seat? And it's just part of what I do. I see it being not done very well so often, but I have no ego in this. It's really for them. And it fits very well into what I do here at the synagogue. It's, what's important for people? I mean, I get a lot out of it. But it's what I get fed also. And it's with my family also. And if anything, this synagogue, we're talking, has brought my family together. Because Beth and I have done it, this whole thing together. We raised our kids in Hebrew school, and their values are wonderful. And it has just all felt very natural. So I don't know if you want to include this in my part of my physician or our part as the religious part, but I think it's a very important part. It's a very critical part of me and my Beth getting together to have said what we said at the exact same time. So.
Oh, it's very powerful. Well, I thank you.
Well, thank you for letting me share my life.
Yeah. And thank you for the great service that you've provided to this community as well.
Well, thank you.